Stacking up Universal Hollywood versus Universal Orlando. This is Go Inform Podcast, episode 73. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the show. So glad to have you here with me today. My name is Sue. I am your vacation maven here on the podcast, and so happy to be talking today about Universal Orlando and how it compares with its counterpart on the West Coast, Universal Hollywood. As I mentioned in the last episode, I'm planning to bring you guys a little more West Coast flair this year on the show and on the website, just to bring in a little more geographic diversity to what we're talking about. I know that in the world we're in right now, especially, you may be considering different geographical destinations. And so it seemed like a really good time to talk a little bit about how the parks on the West Coast compare to what you can get over in Orlando, and just to give you a little more information in your theme park knowledge. There are extensive show notes for today's episode over on the website, so you can find those at goinform.net/73. Make sure you head over there, pin those on Pinterest for reference. Even if one of these destinations isn't quite on your radar yet, hopefully getting a little more information might just make you consider, maybe we want to add this sometime to a future trip. I was lucky enough to visit Universal Studios Hollywood this past summer, and it was really fun to sort of see what is the same, what is different, how things shape up in California compared to what you can do in Orlando. And I'm really excited to be able to kind of give you guys a rundown of all the things that make each place unique. So today I'm going to break down kind of the major points that I think are important in sort of comparing the two places. We're going to talk about location, size, what attractions are there, what's unique in California, what's unique in Florida, cost difference, and how much time you might want to spend at each destination. So again, make sure you refer to the show notes because there is a lot of detail here, and you may want to go back and just reference that later. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump in with the most obvious difference in my mind, which is the location. So Universal Orlando, obviously, that's in Orlando, Florida, and Universal Studios Hollywood, that's in Southern California. So besides just the fact of the geography and the distance from wherever you are, there are some other factors to just note when we're talking about the difference between these two locations. First one, I would say just be aware that Universal Orlando is pretty much right in Orlando. It's only about a 20-mile drive from the airport there, which in Orlando is like a half an hour. In California, Universal Studios Hollywood is about 25 miles away from LAX airport, which is probably a good hour plus drive. But if you are flying in to go to Universal, or you want to just generally, you're trying to get to that part of LA, the Burbank Airport is only 7 miles away from Universal Studios Hollywood. So if you can get a flight into that little airport, that is super convenient and will save you a ton of time in LA traffic. Now, when we're comparing LA and Orlando, there's a lot of, obviously lots of differences, but both cities have a lot of other things to do besides just theme parks, even Orlando, you guys. So, you could always add a Universal day or days into your trip, whether you go into Orlando or going to LA. And that kind of slides into the next point I want to make about location, which is proximity to a Disney park. So if you want to add Universal to your Disney vacation, I'm here to tell you that it is a lot easier to do it in Orlando than it is in LA. And really the reason for that is location. So in Orlando, you can get from Disney World to Universal sometimes in like 20 minutes. It's only about 10 miles between the two locations, and Orlando's traffic is just a lot easier to deal with than California's and LA's traffic. Now, in California, Disneyland is about 35 miles south of Universal Hollywood. So that could totally be an hour and a half each way in LA traffic getting from Disneyland to Universal. So if you want to do both in California, then I highly recommend that you stay close to whichever destination you have while you plan to see that. So when you want to go to Disneyland, stay close to Disneyland. And then if you want to go to Universal, go spend a night or two up in that end of town so that you can avoid 3 hours in the car on your park day. Now, I also always recommend staying on site at Universal Orlando too, for a bunch of reasons. And you guys can go listen to my episode about combining Disney World and Universal Orlando, and also about the Universal hotels, if you want to find out more about that. But in California, it really is a challenge to stay at Disneyland, for example, and then just do a day at Universal and then come back. So just be aware that if you want to do both, you're either going to contend with a bunch of traffic or you're going to want to split your stay up. Now, another thing to keep in mind when we're talking about these two different locations is the weather. Southern California is really literally famous for its perfect weather almost all year round. It's because it's true. So if you want like 70 degrees and sunny and dry, like almost every part of the year, then you want to go to California. Now, if you're going to Orlando, you are going to deal with a lot of heat and humidity for a lot of the year. It's just a fact. This is actually a big factor, sometimes, especially if you want to go in June. Like the weather at Universal Hollywood is just going to be ideal, but it is going to be pretty stifling in Orlando. So just be aware of these differences when you're starting to think about, hey, which destination is right for me? And you guys know, if you've heard any of my other episodes or looked in the archives, I have plenty of advice for how to cope with that weather in Orlando in the summertime. I mean, you totally can. You just have to be prepared. So make sure that if that's your destination, be sure to take a look at my tips. Just get back in the archives and find those episodes, because if you've got the right equipment and the right attitude, you're going to be fine. Okay, so the next thing in our list of comparisons is size. So how does Universal in Hollywood compare to Universal in Orlando? The short answer is it almost doesn't even compare. In Hollywood, you've got one theme park. In Orlando, you've got 2 theme parks, a water park, 8 hotels. Both in Hollywood and in Florida, there is a large shopping and entertainment complex. It's called City Walk on both coasts. That's pretty comparable. But in terms of the theme park options and all of the hotels on site and all that stuff, you're going to find it at Orlando. Now, that might right there make you think, like, why would I even want to know about the Hollywood option? Because there's some cool stuff in Hollywood that's actually not in Orlando. So come with me on a little quick tour, and we can talk about what you're going to find in each spot, just kind of as a general overview and how they compare. So let's start in Hollywood. Now, one of the things to note about the Hollywood Universal theme park is that it's not just a standard theme park. At Universal Studios Hollywood, there is an actual working movie studio. I mean, that's what came first. It's not there for your entertainment as part of the theme park. It was there first, and then Universal got the bright idea to make a tour. And, for years, that was pretty much the only thing that what you could do at Universal Studios Hollywood. And then, they figured out, hey, we should put some rides in here and turn this into a full-fledged theme park. There is no other theme park in the world where you're going to get to go on a working movie and TV studio tour. And this right there could be a reason to visit Universal Studios Hollywood, especially if you're already going to be in that area. If you're going to the LA area already for a trip, the studio tour could be enough reason just to get a ticket to Universal Studios Hollywood for the day so you can see it. The studio tour is part of your admission to the park. It's about an hour-long tour. You go on a tram. There's pictures of it on the website on the show notes. Again, show notes are at goinform.net/73. So you ride on a tram and you ride through the back lot of the studio, and they have a guide on board who, kind of tells you what you're looking at. You drive past, famous movie cars and sound stages and sets that look like New York or London, and they'll tell you what movies and TV shows were filmed there. One thing that was particularly memorable to me was they showed the set, which is the town for the show The Good Place, it was really cool because it was like, oh yeah, that's just like in the show when you watch it. So the studio tour is really fun, especially if you're a TV or a movie buff. One thing I would say about the studio tour is it's probably not very fun if you're like 5 years old. So if you have little kids, that might not be a good way to spend an hour. But otherwise, I think most everybody is going to find something of interest to them on the tour. The other thing to know about the tour is that it's not just like a bus ride through the back lot. There's actually some sort of like attractions built into the tour. So at certain points, the tram will go into like a soundstage, and it will basically be the Fast and Furious ride that they have in Universal Orlando. So there's a couple of things on the tram tour that you can also experience in Universal Orlando, but over there, they've taken them and made them into their own attractions. And the Fast and Furious attraction is one of them, and the Kong attraction. Also, somehow they managed to do that with these trams. That's the ride vehicle. You never get out of it. It just kind of turns into this ride. So that's also something to know. It's a little bit thrilling at times. So if you got somebody who's a real scaredy cat, they may not enjoy that. But overall, the tour is really cool and really worth doing. Now, besides the studio tour, Universal Hollywood has lots of attractions. There's plenty of stuff to do. There's thrill rides. There's family rides. There's shows, just like you're going to experience at any theme park, but a lot like in Universal Orlando. They have a Wizarding World, which we'll talk a little bit more about here in a second. And they also have a lot of rides in common with what you're going to see in Orlando. But they do have a few attractions that are only in Hollywood. One of them is called Jurassic World, the ride. And this is like if you took the Jungle Cruise and crossed it with Splash Mountain and then made it like 1,000 times more intense with giant dinosaurs. That is what this is. It is definitely a headliner type of attraction. You will get wet, by the way. So Universal loves getting you wet. You will get wet on it. And it is quite a thrill. It is a great addition to the lineup in Hollywood and one of those things that you can't do in Orlando. Orlando's Islands of Adventure Park does have a Jurassic Park land, and they have a ride that's sort of like this, but no, this is way, way beyond the Jurassic Park ride that you see in Orlando. So definitely worth doing. Just bring a poncho. Universal Hollywood also has a stunt show called, it's a Water World stunt show. And it's also wet. So sit in the back if you don't want to get wet. And so that's a cool thing that you don't see in Orlando. They also have a new attraction based on the Secret Life of Pets, which is a really cute kind of family, kind of dark ride sort of attraction. And a few other things that are just different than what you've got in Orlando. They also have different walk around characters. So in Universal Hollywood, we saw Frankenstein, which is really cool. I haven't seen the movie Monsters in Orlando. It was around Halloween, so we also got to meet Beetlejuice, which was really fun. Even though there is Universal Studios Florida, which is based on movies and TV also, this just feels a little more authentically themed towards that. And some of it might be because the movie studio is right there. Some of it might be because you are just walking around in that wonderful LA light and weather, and it feels more like a movie set. I'm not sure, but the walk around characters also add to it as well. Okay, so before we jump into comparing the Wizarding World between California and Florida, let's just do a quick review of what you can find in Orlando just in general. So as I said, Orlando's got 2 theme parks and a water park. The theme parks are Islands of Adventure and Universal Studios Florida. And the water park's called Volcano Bay. And Volcano Bay, Universal will tell you, is a 3rd theme park. And it really is highly themed. It's cool. It's got like a giant volcano in the middle with all these water slides and like a water roller coaster. It's its own destination. So there's a lot going on in Florida. A lot of it I've covered before. If you want to dive into really the details, go back to some of my first episodes. I've got virtual theme park tours going through Islands of Adventure and Universal Studios Florida and the Wizarding World down there. So if you really want to dive into what's in those parks, head back into episodes, I think it's 3, 4, and 5. Yeah, so those are some of my first episodes. So keep that in mind. But I think there's just a lot of good information there. But in general, the 2 theme parks in Orlando, you've got Islands of Adventure, which is based on, it's just a series of lands with different themes. So you've got Jurassic Park, you've got Seuss Landing, there's a Marvel Land at Islands of Adventure, and there is the Wizarding World of Harry Potter Hogsmeade Village. Islands of Adventure is a big roller coaster park, so especially now, because there's a brand new coaster there called the Velocicoaster. There is also the Incredible Hulk coaster and the Hagrid's Motorbike Adventure Coaster. So if you like roller coasters and you want to do Universal, then Islands of Adventure in Orlando, that's your park. You notice that I didn't really mention roller coasters when I was talking about Hollywood. And that's because they don't really have roller coasters. They have a mummy ride, which is also in Orlando. And that's like an indoor roller coaster, but it's not like a big, it's not like the big Hulk coaster or the types of coasters that you're going to get at Islands of Adventure. And then the second park at Universal Orlando is Universal Studios Florida. So this is where people get confused sometimes because they'll say they're going to Universal Studios, or maybe you're like Googling it for information. And it's like, wait, do you mean Universal Studios in Florida or do you mean in Hollywood? And when you say Universal Studios Florida, it really just relates to the one park, not the whole. The whole thing is Universal Orlando Resort. So I'm just kind of giving you guys that because I know everybody Googles everything and knowing what to type in does make a difference. Universal Studios Florida is located right next door to Islands of Adventure. That's one of the nice things in Orlando. Even though there are multiple parks, you can easily go between them, which makes it really convenient. At Universal Studios Florida, I think what happened is that they wanted to bring Universal Studios Hollywood, that kind of theming, to Florida. And so some of it is pretty similar to when you're walking around at Universal Studios Hollywood versus the studios in Florida. But it's definitely got a different feel, and it's got a lot of different attractions than what's in California. So in Florida, there is a mummy roller coaster, but it is better. I won't say how or why. I'm just going to tell you it's better. There is a ride that's based on The Tonight Show. So it's the race through New York with Jimmy Fallon. And there is an E.T. ride. There are just a lot of different things that aren't in Hollywood. But there's actually some stuff that overlaps. There's a Transformers ride in both California and in Florida. And Universal Studios Florida has the Fast and Furious ride, which you get to pretty much experience on the studio tour when you're in California. So there's definitely some overlap, but again, there's unique stuff in both places. And the main thing for a lot of us anyway, that's different between Universal Studios Hollywood and Universal Studios Florida is that in Florida, they have Diagon Alley. And that is the only place where you can go to the Wizarding World Diagon Alley. In Hollywood, they have the Wizarding World also, but it is just the Hogsmeade Village part. There's no Hogwarts Express, and there's no Diagon Alley. So I guess where would the Hogwarts Express go? But so if Harry Potter is your main thing, and you want to be able to spend hours and hours and hours exploring new things the whole time, then you probably want to go to Orlando because there is so much more in Florida. And that's what I always thought because I live on the West Coast, but we have always gone to Orlando because we are such big Harry Potter fans and we want to see all the stuff. But I'm here to tell you right now that the Wizarding World of Harry Potter at Universal Hollywood is pretty darn great. It is almost a replica of the Hogsmeade Village experience that you get in Florida, but it's not nearly as crowded. And I think, obviously if you go on a super busy day, it's going to be crowded. But when you visit the Wizarding World in Orlando, it's almost always crowded. It's usually the most crowded part of both parks because people are going there just to see that. And in Hollywood, that isn't the only thing people are coming for. A lot of people are coming to see the studio tour. A lot of people are locals who come fairly frequently. And, yes, they want to see the Wizarding World, but they also really want to hang out in Springfield and ride the Simpsons ride. The Hollywood Park also is spread out where there's like a lower level. You take this huge escalator down to this whole second part of the park. It almost feels like two parks in terms of its layout, which really helps spread out the crowds. And they were very smart by putting the Jurassic World ride in the downhill part of the park and the Wizarding World in the upstairs part of the park. So the crowds are pretty well dispersed in Hollywood, and it makes your experience in the Wizarding World actually really extra delightful. We had a lot of space to ourselves when we were walking around in Hollywood. It was no problem doing the spells. There weren't like long lines for everything. A lot of the shops, it's only a few people in there. So we could really hang out and feel like we were really in Hogsmeade. And that was refreshing. And also in Hogsmeade, you have Hogwarts Castle, which is exactly the same as in Orlando. So you're not missing out at all with that. You don't have the Hagrid's coaster, which is a bummer. I wish that was there. But you do have the shops. You have Ollivanders. You have the 3 broomsticks. And, you can get the interactive wand and cast spells. So you can really have a great Wizarding World experience, even though there is no Diagon Alley. But if Diagon Alley is a big deal to you and you want to be able to do like all the things, then get a ticket to Orlando, because that is the place where you're going to be able to see it. So that kind of brings me to the next point. The next thing that a lot of people want to know is, how much time do you need to allocate to see these parks, to really see everything and not feel rushed? Is this a one-day experience or is it multi-day? And I would say that Hollywood, you could probably do it in a day. Unless you go, it depends on when you go. So obviously it's going to be busier on weekends and it's going to be busier on school breaks. So if you are going on the 4th of July, then you might want to add another day so you actually can get around and see everything. But if you're going during a relatively sort of moderate crowd level time, you can do it in a day. You'll want to get there right when the park opens, and you may want to stay till closing. So just know it would be a long day, but I think you could see everything at Universal Hollywood in one day. We were able to do it in a day and didn't feel like super rushed. So in fact, we even got to go back and do a few things. So you can do it. And our visit was during mid-August, so it was still summertime. I think some schools were back in session, but it was still, a lot of schools were still out then. So it was a midweek day. Now, Universal Orlando, you could do it in a day. That is a topic that's in the back of my mind for a future episode. I have gone just for a day and, seen a lot of stuff, but you're definitely not going to see everything. If you only have one day at Universal Orlando, you will need to have a very major plan for how you are going to make that happen and what is most important to you. And you will want to be there at rope drop, and you will need to be there all day long. And you're still not going to see everything. So Universal Orlando, for sure, is a multi-day destination. And that kind of jumps me to the next point, which is staying near the parks. In Orlando, Universal has really worked in the last decade or so to create an entire destination resort. They really don't want you to only come for a day. They want you to come and stay in one of their hotels and spend, multiple days going to their parks, eating in their restaurants, going to the water park, all of that stuff. And because of that, and to support that, Universal now has 8 on-site hotels that are all close to the parks. Some you can walk to the park within like 10 minutes. Some are like a 10-minute bus ride away. They are all right there on the property. They have thousands of hotel rooms now, and they meet every budget level. No kidding, like from full-on luxury to really, really budget-friendly hotels. And they all have great theming. So they want you to stay on site. So if you want to learn more about that, hop back maybe 15 episodes, look back in the archives for my episode about the hotels, because I've covered all of the different options and some of the perks. One of the best things about staying on site at Universal Orlando is that they offer early admission into one or both of the parks on every single morning for all their on-site hotel guests. So if you are staying in one of their hotels, you get into the parks an hour before the general public. And it's not the whole park that's open. It's mostly the Wizarding World, but that is because the Wizarding World can be the busiest part of the park during the rest of the day. Having that early admission is a really nice advantage, not to mention convenience and all the other reasons why waking up next to the park just makes sense. And in Hollywood, there are hotels within a close distance to the park. The closest hotel is the Hilton Los Angeles Universal City, which is right near the front entrance to Universal Studios Hollywood. There are also a couple other hotels nearby. There's a Sheraton. There's a bunch of hotels as you get a little bit more into Hollywood. So you can stay within a quick like Uber ride or shuttle ride to the park. But none of those hotels are considered like an on-site hotel or a Universal hotel. They are partner hotels with Universal, and you can book those hotels in a package with your park tickets if you want. So there's still like that kind of a synergy, but they are not run by Universal, and they don't have any special guest perks like you see in Orlando. So there's not, at least right now, there's not an early admission benefit or anything like that if you stay in one of those hotels. But as I said way back a half an hour ago, it still doesn't hurt to stay close to Universal Hollywood because of just transportation mainly. So keep it in mind as an option. If you're spending a week in LA, maybe you spend 2 or 3 days up in the Hollywood area. There's so much other cool stuff to see there too. And then maybe you spend, 2 or 3 nights down closer to Disneyland, which is on the whole other end of town. But if you're staying near Universal Hollywood, it won't be the same resort bubble kind of experience that you're getting at Universal Orlando. And if you guys go over to the show notes on the website, you'll see a couple of maps that show like they're a booking.com link, which, by the way, if you guys book something through there, it does help support the show. So thank you very much. But it's a useful map because you can see it actually will show you like today's room rate. Like if you were going to spend the night tonight, I put up a Universal Orlando map and a Universal Studios Hollywood map. So if you want to see kind of where the hotels are compared to the park, head over there and take a look. So that's at goinform.net/73. Let's talk for a few minutes about cost and park tickets and comparing that between the two coasts. So in terms of like a daily price of admission, It's almost the same price, whether you go to Universal Studios Hollywood or you go to one of the parks at Universal Orlando. Universal Orlando has a much more complicated ticket options, and it's mainly because there are 2 or 3 parks that you can put on your ticket there. So if you get a ticket that includes both Islands of Adventure and Universal Studios Florida and allows you to hop between the 2 parks on the same day, that is definitely going to cost more than just a ticket into the single Universal Studios Hollywood park. But in terms of like one park, one day, it's going to be around the same price. Where your cost varies between the 2 coasts is mainly how long you're going to stay. So in Hollywood, if you want to just go for one day, it really is a reasonable thing to expect. But in Orlando, I think when you start looking into all the things there are to do and see, you're probably going to end up wanting to buy a multi-day ticket. And, that's going to cost more than one day. But a couple things to know. I do have a whole episode and a whole post on the website about Universal Orlando tickets. So if you're going there, make sure you check that out. But just kind of in general, some things to keep in mind in terms of questioning assumptions. In Hollywood, they only sell single day tickets. They don't sell like a 2 or a 3 day park ticket. You either are getting a 1 day ticket or you're getting an annual pass. And that might sound a little bit strange, but the way they price their annual passes, it's pretty much the price of a 2 day park ticket. I mean, depending on blackout dates and stuff. But you actually, if you are going to Universal Hollywood and you're planning to go for more than 1 day, make sure you look at the price of the annual passes, because it actually might make more sense to buy an annual pass instead of buying like 2 one-day tickets. So that's just one of those quirks in Hollywood. In Florida, multi-day tickets is really what Universal wants you to get. So they price them pretty competitively. So the thing to look for in Orlando is promotional tickets. If you get on their website right now, just go to universalorlando.com and click on buy tickets. You can see if they're offering any kind of promos on their multi-day tickets. You are basically never going to find a discount on a 1 day ticket on the Universal site. You might be able to find one like through AAA or something like that, but they don't discount their 1 day tickets, especially in Orlando. They want you to get a multi-day ticket. So for example, right now, Universal is offering a get 2 days free when you buy a 3-day ticket at the Orlando parks. And if you're listening to this right now, just so you know, this is a purchase by May 5th. And you can use the tickets up until almost the end of 2022. So this is a good example of the kind of promotional offer that Universal will put out on their multi-day tickets. They want you to they want you to have a 5-day ticket, because then you're going to be more likely to stay in their hotel. So that is why they usually will pop on a few extra days when you buy a 2 or a 3 day park ticket. So don't make the assumption that a longer term trip to Universal Orlando is going to cost you like if you stay do 4 days, it's going to cost 4 times more than 1 day, because it actually probably won't. Those multi-day park tickets, you can almost always find a discount. And if you're also booking a hotel and you book it in the package with Universal, you can still get that ticket deal. So watch for those ticket prices. I actually think it's one of the first things you should do when you are trying to figure out when to go on your trip and if you should go, is look and see what the park ticket prices are and what kind of offers are on right now from Universal. The other factor when we're talking about tickets and a park admission, all that stuff at Universal, I would be remiss if I didn't mention Express Pass. Express Pass is Universal's version of what most of us think of as Fast Pass. It is a skip the line option that allows you to go in a special line at almost all the attractions in the parks and get right onto the ride. A lot of you guys might be familiar with Fast Pass. This is the same kind of idea, except with a few twists. The first one is that an Express Pass is an extra thing that you buy to add onto your ticket. An Express Pass does not have a certain time that you have to go and get in the line. You can go in the Express Pass line anytime during the day that you want and show your pass and go right on, right to the front of the line. Express Pass has a few other nuances. This is another thing I've covered in a past episode that you need to know about if you're going to a Universal park. So put that on your homework list too. Boy, I have a lot of homework for you guys today. Anyway, Express Pass has a limited and an unlimited version. Limited means you can go in the Express Pass line once per day for each attraction. And unlimited means you can go as many times as you want for every attraction that has Express Pass. So that is a very, very powerful tool to have, especially if you are going to be in the parks when crowds are higher. At Universal Studios Hollywood, the one-day park tickets have two options. You can either buy just a regular one-day park ticket, or you can buy a one-day express ticket. When you get that express ticket, that is a limited express. So one time through the line for each ride during the day. But if you put that in your cart, then you're going to get a pop-up saying, would you like to upgrade your express ticket to unlimited? And it's usually like $20 or $30 more to get the unlimited option. So you do have the whole array of choices with Express Pass in Hollywood. But it is just part of your ticket. It's not even like an extra pass or anything. It's just you either have it on your ticket or you don't. Now, in Orlando, Express Pass is a separate ticket. It's like a extra pass that you buy to go with your park ticket. So you can buy that 5-day, multi-day park ticket and only get Express for one of the days if you want. You would buy the Express Pass separately. Most people, I think, buy an Express for their whole trip or they don't get it at all. But it is a separate ticket. So you'll see it when you're shopping for tickets on the Orlando site. You'll see Express Pass pop up as a second step. Maybe not even the second step. There's a lot of steps when you're choosing your tickets there. So again, check out my advice about that. But it is a step in purchasing and it is a separate thing. Part of the reason I think that they do it this way in Orlando is that buying an Express Pass is actually not the only way to get one. You can get a free unlimited Express Pass in Orlando by staying in one of the premier hotels at Universal Orlando Resort. So if you stay at the Hard Rock Hotel, the Royal Pacific Resort, or the Portofino Bay, you automatically receive, it's your room key, is an Express Pass. So, and that is an unlimited Express Pass, and it's for every day of your stay. So that includes check-in day and check-out day. This is a huge, huge perk for guests in those hotels. And another reason why staying on site is really worth considering. So more homework. Be sure to do that research on those hotels. And I have a quick kind of summary of it on today's show notes too. So if you just want kind of a quick rundown, you can get it on those show notes. Goinformed.net/73. So How you get your express pass is different between Hollywood and Florida, but how it works is the same. So you show your pass and you're in the express pass lane. So that part's the same. And in Hollywood and in Orlando, almost all of the attractions have an express pass line. So you'll want to, if you have something you really want to see, make sure it's an express pass attraction. But most everything is. So let me just kind of take a minute and wrap up where I think both coasts stack up against each other. I think that when we talk about attractions, things to see and do, in general, Orlando beats Hollywood. There's just so much more. But, Orlando doesn't have a studio tour. So that is definitely a reason to go to the Hollywood park. The locations, this is up to you. I mean, we're living in a world where we might want to drive for our vacation instead of fly. There might be a certain part of the country you just want to stay closer to, or whatever it is. That's the reason that I wanted to add these West Coast parks in this year, because I just think maybe geography makes more difference these days. The weather, that's a factor. There's no lying about it. Orlando's weather can be crazy. So, and Hell Haze is usually not. So that's also a factor to keep in mind. I personally think California beats Florida for the weather, like always. If you're combining it with Disney, it's a lot easier to do this in Orlando. I have a whole episode about that too. So if you want to, do like a whole week-long theme park trip and do Disney and Universal, that's probably in Orlando. If you like roller coasters, then you want to go to Orlando for that. In terms of other things to see in the same area, I give it kind of a toss-up. It depends on what you want to be, what kind of touring you want to do. In Orlando, it's a lot of theme parks, a lot of family touring, but you've also got Cape Canaveral, you've got Florida beaches, so there's all that. And I mean, in LA, there's endless things to see and do. So it, again, depends on what kind of a trip you want to have and who is coming with you. And then when it comes down to cost, you could go to Universal for one day as just a little added on experience in your California vacation for, not too much cost for a typical theme park pricing. And so that makes that really easy. If you want to go to Universal Orlando, yes, you could do it in a day, same kind of cost, but realistically, it's more of a destination on its own, and the cost is going to reflect that. It's really fun to compare these two locations and to know that, hey, there's more than one option out there. So I hope that this has been helpful to you guys too. Be sure to check out those show notes over at goinform.net/73. And keep an eye on my Instagram. I'm going to be sharing a lot of pictures from Hollywood on the Instagram account in the next month or two. And I'm going to do a few back-to-backs. So you'll see, like, here's what it looks like in Hollywood and here's what it looks like in Orlando. So that kind of stuff. So that's, I think, going to be fun. And my Instagram is at goinformnet. So head over there. Make sure that you're following me. I really appreciate you guys following on social. You can also follow me on Facebook, same handle, at goinformnet. Thanks so much for listening today to my long episode. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to talking to you again soon.